In this video, we're going to go over the achievements module, which is in essence being repurposed in this demonstration for use as a checkpoint. So it's basically a very basic trigger and animation. So if we walk up to our trigger object right here, you can see it just basically displays checkpoint number 1 has been passed. And down here we have another example, which is just to say, let's say there was a bunch of obstacles or a game or something was going on, enemy fighters trying to stop the player from getting to the next checkpoint, and then the player finally makes it. You wouldn't see that up there, of course. You might not even see this box at the bottom, but it lets the player know that they've passed the next checkpoint. Now the reason it's called achievements is just basically because it's a very flexible, very basic interaction that can be used for, let's say, for example, that a checkpoint is a kind of an achievement. The player got past a certain area. But imagine that the trigger object is actually, let's say, a special talisman that the user can collect. And then let's say that where the checkpoint appears here, we actually have the talisman appears. So they collect the talisman, it disappears from the area where it was collected, and then in an area for the player's inventory, the talisman appears so that we know it collected that as part of its inventory now. So there's a bunch of use cases, including the cutscene camera, which is a very basic similar animation where all we're doing is when the user enters the trigger area, we're turning on the camera in that spot. And when they leave the area, the camera turns off. So you can consider that an achievement as well, but that's the generic term for this sort of basic functionality of inventory, checkpoints, and such. Now, to look at it under the hood, obviously all you need to do to modify it is just drag and drop the checkpoint feature into your space, module into your space, and then modify its location as well as the location of whether you want this to be the inventory screen or a checkpoint reference or something. Just move that wherever you want it and it'll just work. And of course you could modify what these objects are to customize for your space, of course. Now looking under the hood, just as with other objects, other modules in previous videos, we've got our achievement trigger and we've got a reactor component attached to it in the inspector. And the reactor component has an onTrigger event. That onTrigger event is basically saying to the achievement text object, so our object that includes our checkpoint right there, when that gets triggered on when the triggered object is entered, we're basically saying set the variable achieved on the achievement text1 object to true. So if we look at the achievement text1 object, we can see that there's an animation called achievement on, and right now you can see that it's off because if we look in the inspector, the text mesh pro component is turned off by default. So if we trigger the animation and we play it, you can see that it turns on the text mesh pro text, as you can see right there in the animation window. So that gets triggered. Here we've got our animator that's attached to the achievement trigger object. And we can see that in the animator, we've got the parameter for achieved. And you just drop down this menu, select the Boolean. In this instance, selected Boolean for a true or false value. So this checkbox means whether it's true or false by default. So we've got our achieved parameter. This is our default state. The achievement is off. And we can see a transition between it and the achievement on animation. And in that transition, we can see that there's a condition that if the value achieved, that parameter right there, is set to true, then go ahead and play the achievement on animation. So back to our achievement trigger, we can see in the reactor that we've got, I just named it past checkpoint. We created an on enter trigger that sets the parameter achieved in the achievement text1 object to true. And just to recap one final time, once that parameter is set to true, it basically initiates the proper condition for the animation to turn on. And let's turn that back off. And when we turn on and play the achievement on animation, it basically turns on the text mesh pro component so that we can actually see our object. Now, as I mentioned, the achievement module basically is very versatile. You can use it for checkpoints, you can use it for collecting that talisman, like for inventory, or for general achievements, but also the cutscene camera. So the difference being that the same way that we're turning on our checkpoint object here with an animation is the same way that with the cutscene module we're turning on the camera, so when the player enters the trigger area, it turns on the camera and records them showing a little bit of video of whatever they're doing in that space.